We often look at crash test dummies, and I guess they've historically been male. They've historically more resembled a male. Not that I guess some of us didn't really appreciate that it made a difference, but crash test dummies are those mannequins that they put in cars, and they've got little things all over them so you can sort of monitor what happens in a collision, what happens to the human body. They're designed to represent and have joints and things like that, like a human body, so that you can see what happens in the course of an accident. And the Department of Transportation has now endorsed a crash test dummy that more closely resembles a woman after decades of use of the solely male-based dummy. And it isn't just a matter of representation. It's to make sure that women are being properly considered in safety tests, especially considering, and I didn't appreciate this, Ollie, women are 73% more likely to be injured in a head-on crash, and they're 17% more likely to be killed in a car crash than men.
Yeah, I knew those numbers.
No, I did not. I just assumed that we used male as crash test dummies because male are usually worse drivers. So you kind of have a better description of who's causing these accidents.
I mean, we have to have a conversation about invisible bias, because I think a lot of this comes from that invisible bias. Well, we just have a crash test dummy. What do you mean? We can put a wig on her and then she's a female, right? Or we can add a chest area and then she's a female, but they didn't take into account the smaller size of an average female driver. They didn't take into account, for example, where the seatbelt goes when you do have a chest. They didn't take into account what happens when you're pregnant and where the seatbelt goes, right? And it's those types of things that have just been, I think, out there for so long. And now, yes, there is a dummy, a crash test dummy that can be designed. It's not there yet, though.
And it's surprising because we think of crash test dummies as being around for decades.
Yeah.
Why no one has ever thought about this before? Because there are significant anatomical differences that should be taken into account, especially when the purpose of the crash test dummy is to measure your body's reaction to something like this.
And able to survive a crash.
And so
what do you do?
You would, of course, want to have different body types.
Look,
part of the equation.
Consumer Reports, and I've used them to purchase things, but Consumer Reports has traced calls back to female crash test dummies to 1980. 1980, right? That's how long organizations have been saying, look, we need to have something different that looks at women, smaller. They did add a smaller female dummy to test, but it was just literally a scaled down version of the male dummy with a chest attached. That's it. That's not the same.
So, and what they've agreed on is that they haven't even set them up yet. They don't have female crash test dummies. They just said it's a good idea. We should have crash test dummies that more closely resemble a woman. Okay, great idea.
So yeah, so hopefully we'll get there. But look, there are some differences besides that they're just a percentage smaller than the average male. A female pelvis is different than a male pelvis. It's more rounded. It doesn't hold the seatbelt in the same way. There's anatomical differences in the neck. There's significant differences in the lower leg, which is really interesting. They're correlated with a much higher rate of leg injuries in women. And this is European officials are saying, look, we plan on testing it within a few years. And in the U.S., it's like, yeah, okay, you can move forward with this.
Yeah. It's also interesting because we have used crash test dummies to understand different body types in that we have children
for babies,
depicted,
the car seats.
and babies for car seats. So it's not like somebody hadn't thought about different body styles and types, but we hadn't thought about the most obvious one that it exists with half the country, male and female.
I have been writing about invisible bias for at least 8 years. So invisible bias is that the male is the default, right? And there are so many different things that we can point to. This is one. There are things like in Sweden, snow plowing patterns had to do with gender. And it's really interesting because the people who originally designed the snow plowing patterns would have said we did not, like, gender did not influence our decision one way or the other. But what they did is say we're going to plow the major streets first and then the surface streets and then the side streets. But if you look at the data, once they finally did, they found that women had different driving patterns than men, and they were also more likely to walk. This is an article I wrote in 2019, by the way. They were more likely to walk down the side streets because they were taking their kids from their home to the school or the daycare or the preschool, and they weren't doing the major thoroughfares to get to work like the men were, right? So then you have moms struggling with strollers. You've got elderly family members who can't get in and out of the house really, and that women were more than 3 times as likely to be injured walking in icy conditions than there were injuries actually on the roads. So it's just, that's one instance. But I'll talk to you too about medical research. The male is considered to be
the default,
the norm, the default, right? So even we know, looking at heart attack medications or heart attack treatment, female heart attacks look very different than male heart attacks. Did you know that?
I didn't.
They do. They're different. The symptoms are different. The way it's treated is different. Women a lot of times will have more of a lead up to a heart attack, some precursor symptoms in the week or 2 weeks leading up to a heart attack than the men do. And it's just one of the things where you just say, look, how can we test all these medications on men and then assume that they're going to be exactly the same in women? They're not.
And it's something I hadn't even thought of before, but it's something as simple as snowplow patterns. A bad snowstorm. Yeah. Let's focus on getting our working people back to work.
Yeah.
Getting the major roads done, and of course getting the roads to the ski resorts plowed. But having a single parent get their kid to school.
Right.
Most obvious safety consideration I think you'd have is.
Right.
Put at the end of the line.
Yeah.
Let's get the major streets going, and then we'll come to your neighborhood and make sure that you can get your kid to school.
Yeah.
So you don't have to walk through snow.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. You're right. It is an invisible bias. It's even things like this. What is the standard office temperature set at? 69, 70.
It's a formula developed in the 1960s based on the metabolic resting rate of the average man.
Yeah.
Right. It actually results in offices that are too cold for female workers, actually. Cupboard shelves that are too high. Tools that are too big to fit in female hands, right? But I mentioned the heart attack one. Have you ever heard the advice, take low-dose aspirin, that could reduce your heart disease?
Sure.
Okay.
Baby aspirin.
That was based on a study of 22,000 men and 0 women. 0 women. Okay, so
why are we having this conversation in 2025? I mean,
yeah, that's part of it, right?
Seem so obvious.
That is part of it, and it's one of the things I think people just say, look, well, we're not biased because we don't see gender, right? We don't see color, whatever. I think one of the things that this shows is that there are differences that do need to be taken into account, including in the crash test dummies.
Right, and I guess people have long considered that the crash test dummy was neither male nor female. But if you consider how...
But it was based on a male body.
Based on a male body, yes, absolutely. And so, yeah, we need to balance these things out, and for safety reasons as well. If you're looking at just the numbers themselves, where more women are hurt or killed in accidents, maybe it's because we're not taking into account body types and body styles,
and how the seatbelts sit.
when we design seatbelts or airbags or just bumper safety or something like that.
There's even, I haven't seen this in an article, but like where the seatbelt rests as it comes across your neck, right? So if you're a shorter woman, I have a daughter who's only 4'11". She does not like to wear the shoulder belt because it cuts into her neck. Like it really, it could hurt her, I think, if she were in a crash, that could cause some significant damage to her neck.
Right.
I guess that's maybe what they're saying when the neck anatomy is kind of different.
Right.
Anyway, come on. Thanks for joining the 21st century.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.